If I didn't tell you already, we're going to be going through Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 to 18 today. We're actually finally starting to get to the end, and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this marks the transition then into the last significant section of the book of Revelation. Just to remind ourselves, some of the features we're especially going to be thinking about here with Revelation. Way back when we started this, we talked about one of the keys to Revelation is repetition. And that's no different than what is no different today as we go through this and we see the great harlot, the great prostitute. We're just seeing another description of something we've already seen. Seeing it from a different perspective, using different imagery, different description. All right, see if there's anything else here I want to say. So we're not really getting to anything new. This description of the great prostitute is going to open up a few more features and details of Antichrist, even bringing into our minds a clearer picture of exactly what Antichrist is. Let's just remember where we were. We were pouring out the bowls of God's wrath, and we got to the end, and it was the final judgment. Of course, the circles were getting really tight in those compared to the big circles of the 7 letters to the 7 churches, and then the 7 seals, 7 trumpets. We got really super tight, so that the end was sort of like that. And again, now we go in reverse. I will say this. This stuff is really important to recognize how we're saying the same thing repeatedly again. I'll just use this as an example. I had somebody come to me and say, well, I'm reading this book and they're saying, this, that, and the other thing. And then I said, well, that sounds millennial. They're like, oh, yep, they talk about that 1,000-year reign of Christ, that millennium. That's a good thing, isn't it? When Christ will come again. I'm like, no, that's a bad thing. That's a wrong thing. That's not not at all what is being described here. So it's you got to be very careful. When it comes to Revelation, make sure you use sources that you trust, because those that teach dispensationalism and millennialism, they come from a viewpoint, and then and that influences how they interpret the scriptures rather than letting the scripture interpret itself. Okay, so we had in the last bowl of God's wrath, we had just a brief reference to Babylon again, and we talked about Babylon, the great enemy of God's people coming over. We also had the destruction of Babylon, the very last scene that we have. Now we're going to back up again a bit, and we're going to see the greater destruction, or destruction of Babylon, in greater detail, and this then puts us into another vision as we get to see the destruction of Babylon the Great in greater detail and description. So here we go. Revelation chapter 17. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke to me. He said, "Come, I will show you the judgment on the great prostitute who is sitting on many waters. The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and those who make their home on the earth have become drunk on the wine of her immorality." The angel carried me in spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed with purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. In her hand was a gold cup full of abominations and the filth of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead this name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw that this woman was drunk from the blood of the saints and the blood of Jesus' martyrs. Well, that's lovely. Okay, very graphic, very descriptive. One of the angels who had the bowls invited John to see the judgment of the great prostitute. So it was announced, and now it's going to happen. The angel wasn't saying, okay, this is happening as we see it play out now. He's like, this is what you're about to witness, so that we know what's going on. And also the proper identification of the characters in this vision and the activity that's actually happening here. So one of the angels who had the bulls invited John to see the judgment of the great prostitute. All right, let's take a look at her. She was riding a red beast. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. These are all things we've seen before, right? The woman was clothed in purple and gold. It should be purple and scarlet, I think I should have there. Gold is also mentioned there too. Was adorned with gold. And wore pearls, precious stones, jewelry you could talk about there if you want to summarize the whole thing. She also carried a gold cup in her hand and was drinking from the blood of the saints. So what are some key things that we're seeing we've seen before? Idea of a woman, right? We have a beast. We have 7 heads, 10 horns. We've seen those types of images before. We haven't seen so much the adornment in the decoration. We're going to get to that more when we see the holy city, the New Jerusalem, the Antichrist, so to speak, the true Christ. What else do we? We see the persecution, the martyrdom of the saints and the faithful. So again, this is painting a big picture for us that what is happening here is attack against the faithful, attack against Christ's people. So again, since we're talking about things we've already talked about, we're just filling in some details. One of the things that we see here is the comparison of the unfaithfulness of the woman on the beast with sexual immorality and adultery. Now, it's interesting to note that we're not specifically, only talking about sexual immorality, but how so often sexual immorality is in reality tied in with a societal destruction, or even a institutional destruction, or you could look at even within the church, and I think we'll see some pretty clear examples of that too. So as we get closer to the end times, we can expect a surge of sexual immorality, and I even think in my years here, you think the last 50 years, 60, 70 years maybe now, since the mid-century, how much sexuality has changed, going from marriage and then living together type of ideas and their cohabitation, and then of course into homosexuality, and now we even have transgenderism, and if you read the wrong news enough, you'll start to see all the notion about sex robots and things like this. So clearly reflective of the spirituality of a people and of a society. Their spirituality or lack of spirituality will usually be evidenced by their views on sexuality and things of a sexual nature too. We're living it, as you might expect. But now the sexual immorality is often used in the Bible, in the Old Testament especially, to describe the unfaithfulness of God's people to Him. And we see here in Isaiah, "Hear this, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I have raised children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, the donkey knows its owner's manager, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand. Look how the faithful city has become a prostitute. She was full of justice. Righteousness once lived in her, but now murderers live there." You want to read a really descriptive thing? Don't have your kids around. It's definitely rated R. Ezekiel chapter 16. Long extended discourse. But now, it's interesting to note here that the faithful were not lured away by the prostitute, but the faithful actually became the prostitute themselves. We'll speak a little bit more about that in just a second. So, to the questions. Who is the Lord speaking to in the above passages, the Isaiah passage and the Ezekiel 16? He's talking about the Old Testament people and the Old Testament church. And what is he saying about them in those? Their rebellion against him is evidenced by the apostasy. I spelled apostasy wrong, I'm sorry. apostasy in true worship and morality. Where had God's people gone bad? It's not just that they were worshiping Baals in the sexual indulgence. It was, the revelry that was as a part of that. I mean, granted, that's a huge pull for a religion like that. If you could have sex as much as you want with anyone you want, it's going to be a very attractive type of thing. But it wasn't so much that they were worshiping Baal in this way, but they were also rejecting the Lord in unbelief. So, again, their outward activity manifests their inward rebellion against the Lord and true worship, and the true worship of the Lord. So they were cheating. Actually, they weren't cheating. They became the prostitute with whom other gods were consorting. I guess you could look at it that way. So don't look at it as, oh, they were lured off by the prostitute of Baal. No, they became the prostitute themselves and lured Baal into them, that they might have Baal for themselves in this way. Again, just an example. I'm just using Baal worship as an example. To what does the Lord compare their sin again? To prostitution, your spiritual unfaithfulness. Again, they're the cheater, so to speak. They're the adulterous one. They're not being lured away by one who is who's an adulteress. Also here, I spelled relationship wrong too, but my spell checker just did not work, did it? You think of sexuality, and when God says things about the marriage bed being kept pure, and no introduction of something foreign that would spoil the marriage bed, there's that spiritual side of things too, that there has been a defilement in the perfect relationship between God and his people. We've introduced other characters into the spiritual bed, so to speak. And you think about that, and even in terms of sexuality, when you have sex, you have kids, and when we're doing this on a spiritual level, and God's people no longer faithful to him go consorting with other gods and worship other things, you can expect a breeding, so to speak, of sorts. Maybe that's the way of looking at it, a breeding instead of a reproduction of children. But my point is it's going to continue to grow as that continues to reproduce. So as long as the unfaithful continue to have relationship and defiled relationship spiritually, we're going to see an increase of that. Okay. Revelation chapter 12, we saw another vision of a woman. In that vision, the woman was the bride, right? The holy Christian church. Jesus also spoke of the church as his bride. With this in mind, who or what is the great prostitute of Revelation? Okay, this may kind of be like a little bit of a trick question here, but I think it's best understood here. The wife has run away, in a way. The bride has gone bad. And so what we have being described by the great prostitute, the great harlot, is the apostate church. That's a part of the visible church here on earth, the church that has been defiled by, you think of false teaching and the false prophets. Again, it's important to emphasize that this is it's meant to look like the bride of Christ, but it's no longer the bride of Christ because she has separated herself from her husband and defiled herself in other ways, sold herself off in a way. You can also think of this about being the church that's the anti-church, the church within the church that's the anti-church. It's against what being a true bride is all about. Okay, this next one causes us to jump ahead a little bit to take a look. There is an explanation in verse 15 for what that whole idea of the many waters that the prostitute is sitting on. That refers to the many peoples, the tribes, nations. Again, I'm looking at it from a reproductive standpoint. Okay, what has come out of her in that sense? She has produced this... it's a word I'm looking for. I can't think of what word I was looking for. Anyhow, she has produced this vileness, I guess you could say, across the entire earth, not just in a certain spot. So what does that tell us about the popularity of false teaching and the extent of this apostate church? It is very widespread, so be keeping this in your mind. a Christian so-called church, right, that is widespread all over. You can't go anywhere in the world hardly without there being this institution there. Hint, 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 hint. This leads us into a little bit of a discussion here. Let's say a friend tells you, I'm going to that church. They have a lot of people there, so they must be doing something right. The size of the crowd never is a measure of the faithfulness of the church. The size of the crowd is never the measurement of the faithfulness of the church. In fact, it's quite likely that the opposite is true, but you also have to be careful because the smallness of the church doesn't necessarily indicate the faithfulness of the church either. There may be something there that, the smallness of the church is a matter of sinful stewardship and sinful priorities and not carrying out, not preaching the gospel as it should, because not preaching the gospel is going to result in a smaller church likely as well. We should also know that the humans are going to be attracted to churches with false teaching a lot more than with orthodox teaching. Just plain and simple fact. It's no surprise for us that the big churches contain lots of false teaching. And you can see that to varying degrees, whether it's a mega church like Elmbrook or, that's what I got to check on, Benny Hinn. Benny Hinn came up here and I should have put a picture of him on here. I'm going to go here a second, and I made reference to Benny Hinn and his faith healing. He was always on TBN, which of course TBN was there it is, the Benny Hinn. You guys don't know who I'm talking about when I talk about Benny Hinn. Here he is, right? Tofik Benedictus Benny Hinn is an Israeli televangelist known for his regular miracle crusades, revival, or faith. Let's see if we can find some. You think here's his. These are his latest ones. Look at the amount of views that this guy gets. Okay, Benny Hinn Ministries, discerning demonic activity and casting it out. I just want to see if there's some classic Benny Hinn type things on here. Do we have any? This is just a teaching thing. Now all these are going to keep popping up in my YouTube because I'm going to see Benny Hinn. Oh, where is he doing? Is he looking at his... Looks like he might be driving in his car now. Let's see here. But just, again, look.
This young man, and it says...
Getting some teaching there. Look at the 100,000 views. We get 20. You can see like the way he dresses, how to listen to the Holy Spirit. I was going to look for some, I should look for some, here, Benny Hinn Crusade Classics. Let's take a look at this one. I'm probably going to get an advertisement up here. Yeah, of course we got to wait for Verbo. I'll click it here. I just want you to see this as an example of what is being talked about.
That look is a look that can only happen by a roaring fire at a Verbo cabin.
I'm going to skip this. Let's see if we got... This only has 22,000. Oh, this is
I believe you are the Son of God.
Let's see if we get... He'll probably do... Oh, we got some singing going on here.
Swelling, the hands were like this, but just see, right?
The swelling is gone?
Swelling is gone completely. Praise Jesus. It has become like this.
Give the Lord a mighty hand of praise, say. I want you to give the Lord a bigger shout of hallelujah. Come on. Take your seats, please.
Let's see if we got any more. Oh, there was a wheelchair back. You saw the wheelchair back there? Look at the crowds. Look at the crowds.
Warm myself, and then the pain I start getting little.
What happened tonight, though? What happened tonight?
Tonight, I was right behind in that crusade of yours. Yesterday I was in little front, but yesterday I had, but I could not walk. But today, from behind my chair, I stood up and I walked all the way from all the round, from my barrack, from back, and I came straight from this front center, and I came. I praise the Lord.
Praise the
Jesus,
Lord.
hallelujah.
इस बहन
Praise
को अपने का रोग भी था
the
और
Lord.
परमेश्वर ने इन्हें चंगा किया
He
जब
goes
एक दिन ये
around
गॉड
This
टीवी देख
is
रही
so
थी।
Okay,
glorious.
there's some good old classic Benny Hinn. Had to show you that. Anyhow, if you want a good laugh for a day or two or three, look at Benny Hinn. My point in that is you saw the crowds. I mean, hundreds of thousands of things that, you know, it just makes my point. Big crowds don't always mean faithful church. In fact, big crowds are probably evidence of unfaithful church. All right. Let's keep going. Okay, now we're back here. Number 4. We are told here that the kings of the earth supported the prostitute. What does this mean? This is something we've already talked about. And so here we have, that's in the introduction. And then we have her riding the beast. And we're going to see the identification of the beast being the beast out of the sea, which we've already talked about here too. But what do we see here? Working together of earthly authority with spiritual authority. In other words, government-sanctioned religion. Examples of where this has occurred in history. There's a couple historic examples that Dr. Becker had. It's always fun to read the context, but he referred to a 1982 court case in Arkansas about public school and teaching teaching religion in public school, or how religion was being taught in public school. I'm going to... there's a couple other examples that I could look at, but this is the one I really wanted to show you. And again, this will take us to a hyperlink. This is just recent things, and my concern is that if we don't think this is coming to an America near us, let's think again. So, Finland and Sweden are Lutheran. In a way that the country controls the religion. This is the Evangelical Lutheran Mission Diocese of Finland. So this is not the State Lutheran Church of Finland. This is actually the church body that's affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. That's how I came across this, because President Matt Harrison had shared it. In the last couple of weeks, well, this goes back to January, but it's been ramping up in a couple of weeks. This is the main article. Is against the diocesan dean, and again, this is Lutheran Church. The Prosecutor General of Finland has brought charges against the Reverend Dr. Johanna Pahola, Dean of the Evangelical Lutheran Mission Diocese of Finland, and another person here, a doctor. You see that. The case concerns a pamphlet, Male and Female He Made Them, Homosexual Relationships Challenge the Christian Concept of Humanity. It was published by the Finnish Luther Foundation in 2004. Okay, that's when the document was published, was 2004. The indictment is for incitement to hatred against a group. Let's see here. It talks about that. As a Christian, I neither want to, nor can I discriminate against or degrade anyone created by God. Every human being is created by God and redeemed by Christ, and is thus equally precious. This is precisely the main theme of Dr. I don't know how you say it. I'm not Finnish, and I can't talk about IKEA's things either, really. This does not negate the fact that in accordance with the Bible and the Christian concept of humanity, homosexual relations are against the will of God, and that marriage is intended to be only between a man and a woman. This is what the Christian church has always taught and will always teach. This is just a little bit of what I'm talking about, but it's likely that this pastor is going to be in prison. Almost certain. And of course now they're trying to garner support for him here in the, there it is. It was April 29th, so that's what just happened. The Prosecutor General filed a document instituting proceedings in the Helsinki District Court, which will set a date for the hearing. So again, it's happening. And I think we're going to see it happening, especially in these countries where the state runs the church. And in almost all of Europe, that's the way it is. The state runs the church. There's some free churches, like in Germany. Our church is a free church in Germany. Other examples of this, of course, in the Soviet bloc, communism, Marxism, replaced Christianity with a whole new thing. If you want to go back again to World War II, Nazism, same thing. Of course, they all say, no, Hitler was a Christian. No, Hitler was not a Christian. Hitler took Christianity, twisted it all into a big mess. and made it into something else. How is it the false teaching can make somebody drunk? Think of the behavior of somebody's drunk, right? You can't think clearly, you can't think logically, you get more and more confused. I especially see this with sexuality, and I think that's a statement from the Lutheran Church there in Finland came out true, or spoke about it truthfully, that you look at, well, let's trust the science, let's trust biology, right? What does biology tell us about male and female and human reproduction and things like that? There's only one way. There's only one way. All this nonsense about homosexuality and genderism or transgenderism and things like that is not biologically based. It's psychologically based, and of course, psychology is what's considered to be pseudoscience, because psychology finally is just whatever I believe. It's been turned into whatever I believe. So all the transgenderism and the homosexuality and things like that fall within the realm of psychology, not biology, which completely denies homosexuality and transgenderism. My point here is that which should be absolutely abundantly clear as an abomination to natural humanity and nature itself, homosexuality and transgenderism. Okay, take a look back at Revelation 13. We're not going to do that. We'll just remind ourselves of Revelation 13. That was the beast out of the sea and the beast out of the earth. So the beast that the great harlot is riding is the beast out of the sea. What again does the beast signify? The authority of the secular government working with the devil, with the dragon, remember, working to destroy the church. And again, what's happening in Finland is coming to an America near us. Of course, one of the most active groups against religion on a governmental level is based out of Madison, and I can't remember, is it the Freedom from Religion Foundation or something like that? They filed so many lawsuits against churches into the court system, in the justice system, right here in our own backyard. They're the ones, of course, who have filed many lawsuits against the tax exemptions of the church, and then also the clergy allowances for housing and stuff like that. And it's always funny how they do it, because they just don't understand a clergy's work. Blah, blah, blah. All right, got that beast out of the sea. So the great prostitute is riding the beast out of the sea. We see a cohabitating relationship, I guess you could call it, between earthly authorities, those that should be existing only in the left-hand kingdom of God, and the church, the false church, the apostate church, the right-hand kingdom of God, essentially being and operating as one kingdom. Notice the prostitute is wearing clothes that are the same color as the beast. What does this tell us about the apostate church, or what happens when a professional athlete is traded from one team to another? You wear the team colors, right? We're all on the same team. So the false church wears the team colors as the earthly authorities. Now there's a couple different ways we see this, and I'll use this as two examples. Here in America, you're looking at the churches that most line themselves politically and where the cultural movements are as being like this. Churches that will have their flag is not the Christian church, it's the rainbow flag, things like that. You could see another example of a church being a government unto itself, which is the Roman Church, right? Is and always has been. Since the Roman Empire became Christian, the idea of church and state was combined into one. There's a lot of history into that. Where was I going? See if there's anything else. Okay, the next one. What does the fact that the prostitute is clothed in purple as well as wearing expensive jewelry tell us about the apostate church? Pretty much you can say this: she's got money. She's worth a lot. And I don't think I'm saying anything that you don't know when I say that, especially as we get to the specific, the most specific, what's the word I'm looking for, example of the apostate church in being the Roman church. I haven't looked it up, but when you look at the property that the Roman Catholic Church has throughout the entire world, just add that up. The vast wealth. I mean, if we're looking at it in terms of business, I bet you the Roman Catholic Church and its assets would be close to the top of the list. Also, what was I thinking with that too? Oh, the widespread. Remember the harlot has her influence over all parts of the world. I alluded to that before. There is hardly a place in this world where you cannot find a Roman Catholic Church. Even in the Eastern Bloc, in some places where Eastern Orthodoxy might be, the dominant Christian religion there, you're still going to find. You're probably still going to find Roman Catholicism. I mean, Eastern Orthodoxy isn't that far of a stretch away from it. Except Eastern Orthodoxy doesn't have a papacy; it has a patriarchy, which is in a lot of ways similar to the papacy. But anyhow, she's got money, she's got influence. Look at Benny Hinn. We should look up his net value once. I bet you he's worth a couple $1,000,000, if not more. Okay, let's look at 2 Corinthians 4 here. Indeed, we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ is Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For the God who said, light will shine out of darkness is the same one who made light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the person of Jesus Christ. So a good barometer for this is if the church is speaking more about itself, or if you hear something like the church is this, the church does this, the church says this, that should be an indicator that it's not a true church. It's an apostate church. Or the preacher, if it's, you look at Benny Hinn and it's all about Benny Hinn. It's not about Christ. It's just, it drives me nuts about some Wells churches' websites and stuff like that. And, while the church does great, can do things in a community and things, our Christ is everything for us. So how we articulate that and how we show that, I think, is really, really, really important. So if we're preaching our institution or we're preaching ourselves, we are not going to be a true church. Notice here, though, too. Oh, wait a second. I cut some off. Maybe there's more. Here it is. We hold this treasure in clay jars to show that its extraordinary power is from God and not from us. And this is just a fascinating comparison here. So what's the difference between what the real church gives people to what the apostate church gives people? The real church gives eternal treasures in an earthen cup, and the false church gives eternal destruction in a gold cup. I just think it's fascinating. And this, there's that great scene at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right? Where the Nazi stooge, finds the most exquisite, bejeweled gold cup, and this has to be the cup of Christ. He drinks out of it, and he melts and is destroyed. And then Indy finds the carpenter's cup, this little wooden carved chalice that was the Holy Grail, right? Not true, but it does kind of illustrate for us what's going on here. It is not about the container, is it? It's about what's in the container. And the church is just distributing what's in the container. We hold this treasure in jars of clay, in clay jars, and almost here this idea of clay jars. It's like cheap drinkware, right? Even cheaper than IKEA. Where the false church will offer the gold cup, and boy, it looks great in that gold cup, but it is not the champagne to beers on the inside. Why is the apostate church called Babylon the Great? Babylon, of course, is the enemy of God, always coming from the east. But why is it called the Babylon the Great? Because the greatest threat to the true church is that which is itself, in a way. So the greatest threat to the church, the faithful, is the apostate church. Of course, we are recognizing here the apostate church is teamed up with the secular government. But until the last day, the visible Christian church, it's going to be its own worst enemy. That's just unfortunately the way it is. The faithful church will get smaller and smaller. Now, I get that this is just blah, 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 we're getting down. But remember how we started this section. This vision is about the judgment of the great harlot. Her end is coming, right? Let's not get so sucked in and down about we're about ready to celebrate our victory, but we also know the reality of that which is going to come before that great victory. What does the tell us about the apostate? What does it tell us about what the apostate church does to believers who go to her side? She will be persecuting the true believers. It should be, what does that tell us about what the apostate church does to believers who do not go to her side, is what it should be, who do not go to her side. I don't know why that is. It's actually wrong on there too. The apostate church will persecute and kill those who don't agree with it. Cancel culture of a different kind. Actually, no, it's cancel culture of the real cancel culture kind. The church is getting canceled all the time right now in various ways, in various places. The church has been canceled in China. The church has been canceled in Hitler's Germany. The church was canceled out in communism, socialism. It's certainly not what we want, but it's going to continue to happen. Right now here in America, I'll say this, let's use what we can use and do what we can do to try to temper this as much as we can. The Lord has given us various ways of doing that, but also recognize that as we get closer to the last day, it's going to continue to make itself worse. All right. Drink. Let's keep talking about the beast. When I saw her, I was greatly amazed. Well, who wouldn't be? She's an impressive sight, right? And the angel said to me, why are you amazed? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, the one that has 7 heads, 10 horns. The beast that you saw, he existed, is no more, and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. Those who make their home on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be amazed when they see the beast, because he existed and is no more and will exist again. In other words, they're going to be amazed that they put their trust in him and they got it wrong. They thought the beast was the real deal. A mind that has wisdom is needed here. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman is sitting. They are also 7 kings. The 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. But when he comes, he must remain for a little while. The beast that existed and is no more is the 8th king, who is one of the 7. Don't get that. I mean, it'll become clear when I show it to you. And is going to go to destruction. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but along with the beast they will receive authority like kings for 1 hour. Time is limited. They're only going to have their part, and they're going to get begotten out of the way. They share one purpose, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Those who are with him are the called, the elect, and the believing. Notice it's just a little tight idea there of the triumph of the church. The angel also said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is sitting are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The 10 horns and the beast that you saw will hate the prostitute and will cause her to be abandoned and naked. They will also eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to carry out his purpose, namely to agree to give their royal authority to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. The woman whom you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Okay, lots of details in here again. Just describe for us what we're dealing with. Whoops, back up. To understand the specifics of this vision, we need to look at each piece of the puzzle. Just think of it as a puzzle piece. And this is not a difficult section. If we just piece it together, it comes to us pretty clearly. We must begin with the 7 heads equals 7 hills comparison. What city is known as the city of the 7 hills? There's a couple ancient cities, but if we're talking, ancient historians have only talked about one city that has 7 hills. There you see it. It's given away especially because you see what's right here on this northeastern side of the hill. This is Rome. This is the Tiber River here. This is ancient Rome here, and the different hills. I used to know all these, the Capitoline, the Palatine Hill. it's obviously clear here we're talking about Rome. Now remember what I said before. In the new era, you have Common Era and things like that, before Common Era, before Christ. In the era, Rome was often referred to in the world as Babylon as well as the Roman Empire. Even as it went through the centuries, it was often referred to as Babylon, in a secular way, not in a biblical way at all. Next, we must figure out what this phrase is that describes the beast. He existed, is no more, and will exist again. Compare this to the way God is described in Revelation, who was, who is, and who is to come. What does this tell us about the beast? So the beast does everything it can to be like God, to do God's work. You can see that, right? He existed, is no. You can see the repetition of how he falls short of who God is. Yet everything he is doing, or she is doing, or whatever, this is the beast, right? Is trying to be like God. All right. Next, we look at the 7 heads, also standing for 7 kings. Some have said these 7 kings stand for 7 Roman emperors. Math just does not add up. There is no fit for the pattern of Roman history. Again, we're not taking Revelation literally, okay? There is no fit for this pattern. We do see 7, though, as being 3 and 4, and so we see an interaction with the people. If the beast stands for secular antichrist or anti-Christian governments, then the individual heads could stand for 7 individual enemies of God's people throughout history. And this actually fits much better when we look at it. And this also covers both Old Testament faithful and New Testament faithful. And again, so we're bringing together Old and New Testament a lot of times in the book of Revelation here. Let's see here. The one head that exists in John's day would obviously be the Roman Empire. By the way, that's the 7th and the 8th, and then the 8th was the 7th. We'll come back to that. There's the one. Well, that's actually the one that existed in John's day. The 7th and the 8th that are to come are going to come from this. It's not going to be the same as this, which hint, 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 is the Roman Church. The 5 kings that have fallen are other kingdoms that have tried to destroy God's people before Rome. I'll move myself over here. So we're thinking in terms of what? Egypt, yeah, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece, Alexander the Great. It's really interesting because if you compare Revelation to Daniel, which we didn't do here, but the abomination that causes desolation, and there's a double fulfillment there. We come to Greece as the sacrifice of the pigs by Antiochus Epiphanes. We think that when the exiles are returned, that everything's hunky-dory peachy keen, but no. The rebellions of Judas Maccabeus and the cleansing of the temple and things like that. That was a really, really brutal time for God's people in that 500-year period from the end of the prophets to when Jesus comes again. Of course, then Rome comes in, and Greece is driven out. Of course, after Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire falls to pieces pretty quickly. And the Holy Land changed dynasties. It was Seleucid, it was Ptolemy, it was Hasmonean. During that time, during those 3 or 4 centuries, it changed hands an awful lot. It's a pretty brutal time. But there was a lot of, especially when they Hellenized it, the intent was the destruction of the worship of Yahweh, of the faithful God. During this time, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were buried for protection and things like that, a lot of the Old Testament manuscripts were hidden and buried during this time frame in order to somehow, keep and protect the sacred scriptures. Okay. Where are we now? Oh, this is that idea who the 7th king is. The 7th king, who is the 8th king? It's kind of a trick question, but it's still Rome, the kingdom that is. It's just a different manifestation of Rome. At least this is how I am seeing it. It still is. The beast himself, considered the 8th king. The explanation shifts from the heads of the beast to its horns. And these 10 horns stand for 10 more kings. What is their affiliation? Again, not looking at individual specific kings, but we even with the first 5 we looked at larger groupings of kingdoms and the progression of history through that. Right, those 5 kings, with the exception of Egypt, match a lot of same similar to Daniel's visions of the progression of history. We're seeing the progression of history of the attack of the church. So 10, of course, is a complete number. This is the number of forces that are working to destroy the church until now the end of time. All of them together in this big lump, right? Notice that they're only for 1 hour. In other words, they'll come and they'll go. They'll come and they'll go. And when one leaves, the next one's going to come. One leaves, the next one comes. So just to give you a couple examples of unspecified future enemies seeking to destroy the church, Islam comes to mind. Luther recognized the threat of the Turk. Nazism, communism, those types of things, come and go. Unfortunately, we still have communism in our midst here in the world. And, what will take its place or what form it may take. It may take a completely different form. But we're going to continue to see this progression until the end. Until finally, what's going to happen. This is just a fascinating thing. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself though. What is the common thread that winds its way through all the description? They're bent on one goal. The power and authority of secular government is in use and service of the beast, whose aim is the destruction of the faithful church, or I should say the dragon. Not of the beast, but because it is the beast, but the dragon. The power and authority of secular government is in use and service of the beast, whose aim is the destruction of the faithful church. This is why, the Christian church is always going to have, the true Christian church is always going to have a skepticism towards the earthly authorities, recognizing the work the devil can do through them and the destruction of the faithful that can happen. And also the leading away of the unfaithful, because if you're not for us, you're against us in a way. So all those aligned with that are going to be lost for eternity. That's a significant thing. We also balance that though with the truth of the fourth commandment, that all these institutions are instituted by God. I know I spent a lot of time talking about that before, so we're not gonna reconciling that notion. Even here in the church, the apostate church is what? The visible church here on earth. How can that be? Why didn't Christ keep her pure? Why is the greatest threat to the church and the church itself? Right? Well, we're sinners. It's all except for God, of course. And until he cleanses and purges all sin from us and from this creation, this is the way it's going to be. Okay, I gave you a longer section from Ezekiel chapter 16. I am not going to read it just for time. Again, a very, very graphic description. It's the remainder of the one that I talked about, the R-rated one. You can't read this with your children at home, okay? But especially Revelation 17. What's going to happen to the relationship between the apostate church and the secular antichrist she's riding on? Essentially, finally it's going to turn on her. And it will, the picture I get here is that it finally, it begins to eat itself to death. And we're seeing a little bit of this, I think, even here now in America, because, just how Christian churches align themselves socially and politically. Christian churches need to be very cautious to do that, because eventually, like I said, eventually you're going to turn. And some churches have sensed this already. That now maybe the government is going a little bit too far with what it's doing. But finally, the church is going to be destroyed. And, even if it calls itself, even if it's the apostate church, it's going to turn on yourself. Anyhow, okay. What are the takeaways for us today? I think this is the best thing to take away here today. This is directly a quote from Dr. Becker's book here. Again, tough pill to swallow, but seems to be the best way of looking at it. In the Church of Rome, which officially damned the doctrine of salvation by grace through faith at the Council of Trent, the apostasy of the church reached its fullest development. The Lutheran confessions unequivocally identify the papacy of Rome as the great Antichrist. This is at least partial fulfillment of the prophecies of chapter 17. And again, it's really hard for us to distinguish and see this because it's happening within the visible Christian church. It's like, well, how can this be? You just note a couple of things too, and maybe this is an example of what I just said about the beast. It finally turns on itself and eats itself. Some of you lived in the mid-century when Kennedy was elected, and the absolute terrifying fear that many evangelicals had, because now we're going to have a Catholic. We're going to have a Catholic president, and the Vatican is going to end up ruling over the United States. Well, that didn't happen. But I see especially now a lot more tension between the Catholicism and the government in a lot of different ways. One example I see of the fighting within itself and the beast beginning to eat itself to death is with the scandals in the Catholic Church regarding sexual abuse. If any of you happen to listen to the Chicago radio station, Father Flager, and that whole thing in his parish, the parish is being put under discipline by the Chicago diocese because they're protecting Father Flager and the sexual allegations of sexual misconduct in things like that. In that way too, that the church has had to turn on, or the government has had to turn on the church. But we also see the influence and the affluence of the church in covering up the scandals that it has had. I think the clergy sex abuse scandal, which is not just in America, it's all over the Catholic Church, all over the world, is an example of the what we've just gone through and the absolute apostasy of that. Of course, is this happening in any church? Yeah, it is. Yes, I mean there's even those that can fall into sin in our church, but to the institutional extent that it is within the Catholic Church, I think is what's striking, especially. Okay, sorry we got to end kind of on a sour note. We're going to get to the victory. Remember how we started this. It is the destruction and the judgment of it. So all that we see is going to be put away by God. And we are at 50 minutes as well. So we will wrap it up, and we will ask for the Lord's blessing. No, I'm still probably working with the confirmation students, so let us pray. May the blessing of the eternal God be on us as we work in worship, His light to guide us, His presence to strengthen us, His peace to unite us now and forever. Amen.